Today we're looking at how to break castles using Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition, so stay with us. Hello my fellow game masters, I hope you're all doing very well this very fine day as we look at the question of can we break castles using Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition? My name is Guy, and of course you're watching How to Be a Great GM. So the topic of breaking castles using Dungeons & Dragons has been around since, well, the beginning of Dungeons & Dragons as a matter of fact, and each edition has made it more difficult to break the castle as we know it. And there's various reasons for that, and some of them I don't know myself, and I wish I did. Nonetheless, we're looking at 5th edition Dungeons & Dragons, so if you're not familiar with 5th edition Dungeons & Dragons, I suggest you perhaps wait for tomorrow's video, which is not focused on Dungeons & Dragons. It's going to be a fairly technical video as we go through this. Now, if you are an aficionado of Dungeons & Dragons, and you've been around as long as I have, these are interesting questions that need to be asked, because ultimately, I think anyway, this is just the tip of the iceberg. This is the first video, and what I would like to see is a series of videos where we unpack just what is the impact of magic on a medieval type of environment, which is arguably the basic fantasy environment, regardless of where or what sort of setting it is. It's always based on stone castles and magic users. And how does that actually change our world? So that's the series I'd like to do. If you want to hear more about that, if you want us to discuss that, leave your comments below. We need to know. Hit the like button if you think that this is something that could be useful to unpack. Now, don't worry, I'm not abandoning storytelling whatsoever. This is actually a quest that I am on to try and see if we can reconcile the technical, the mechanical aspects, the rules as written, with a narrative context. So that's what we really want to do. So this is what we're going to be looking at. We're going to look at some terms and conditions, because there are always terms and conditions to these kinds of debates and discussions. We're then going to look at the spells that I would recommend trying to use if you are going to take on a castle, and just how they break the castle system as we know it. And then we're going to look at some weapons to compare and see if we're on the same page or not as the designers of Dungeons & Dragons. So that's where we're going to start off. Let's look at those terms and conditions. Now, the terms and conditions are, there are quite a few of them. As you can see here, worn or carried. Now, the wording of most of the spells within 5th edition speak about worn or carried items being immune to things. Fireball doesn't damage worn or carried items. The reasoning behind that, I assume, because I don't know, so if you do know, leave that comment below. The reason is because players kept complaining when all of their equipment got burnt when they got hit by a fireball, or they were trying to circumnavigate the inevitable debate that then raged on. If you're hit with burning hands, does your leather armor catch fire and basically fall apart? In older editions, I know that was certainly the circumstance. Nowadays, you've got the worn or carried caveat, so if anything is worn or carried, it's immune. What that says to me is that there's a funny mechanic happening there. I cannot fathom it personally as to why that needs to be stated. But it means that if what's good for the goose is good for the gander. A castle is not necessarily worn, nor is it carried, but it contains a lot of humanoids inside of it, and it does carry things like picture frames and wall. So, if the spell said worn or carried, I've excluded it from this debate that I have possibly started here. So that's out. If it says creature, target creature, it's out. A castle is not necessarily a creature, unless of course it's a wonderful animated object, in which case that's fantastic, but that's a different video altogether. So if it says worn or carried, if it says creature, it's out. Absolutely gone, goodbye, so long, farewell. Now, hit points and damage reduction. Damage reduction is sometimes applied to things, and hit points are applied to things obviously all of the time. Where can we turn to in terms of getting our rules? Now, the most important thing, and I possibly should have mentioned this right at the beginning, is that I am only using the core books. I'm using the DMG, I'm using the PHB, and I'm using the Monsters Manual. So those are the 3 books I'm looking at. I'm not looking at other books, I'm not looking at supplements, I'm not looking at addendums, I'm not looking at none of that. This is as it was written when the books first came out. And I think it's important to do that, because not a lot of people necessarily pick up all of the other stuff. So this castle I made behind me in Dungeon Fog, which is a wonderful map designer. Go and check it out if you haven't. And I've used this castle as our base. Now, this castle I have designed basically on the principles of an original castle layout, a Norman castle layout. You have a keep in the center. Let me see if I can get rid of these things without breaking it. You've got a keep at in the very center of the castle, and then you've got this outer bailey, and in the, oh, look at that. Look at how bad I am at green screen. So then you've got this outer bailey. Oh, there goes my hand. This outer bailey, which then controls the courtyard, and you've got stable yards over there. You've got stables. You've got a blacksmith. You've got fletchers. You've got barracks. You've got all sorts of things for your various people. And of course, you've then got, if I get out of the way, a gate keep or a gate house that over here that obviously will allow people entrance into the actual castle itself. So this is our stock standard castle. Now the important thing to bear in mind is that these walls, all of the outer walls of the castle and the walls of the actual keep, you can see that I haven't done this before, of the actual keep are, I've put them at roughly 10 foot thick. Now that is based on traditional medieval castles. The base of the wall sat somewhere between 7.5 to 15 feet in thickness of stone. And then there were other things, of course, added on top of that and added in between that as well to sort of increase the strength of the walls, because as you went up, you had lots of pressure, so you needed lots of width. But that's not what we're looking at today. All right. So this is defaulted back to where we were. So let's just go back to our hit points and damage reduction. So the question then is what do we base our hit points and our damage reduction of our walls on, if any? Well, for that we turn to the spell Wall of Stone. Wall of Stone, standard magic spell. It allows you to make a lot of walls of stone, and I've seen reviews where people have said it's cheaper to build a castle out of Wall of Stone than it is to actually physically build the castle. Well, again, within the confines of this video, we don't have any rules or guidelines on the cost of building an actual castle. We don't have any guidelines on how thick the walls should be, etc., etc. So this is all kind of in the grey area. So I've tried to find rules as written that we can apply. So assumedly, if you had the resources to build a castle such as this castle here, which actually was designed by a friend of mine, in 1996, I think, somewhere around there. So if you were to build a castle like this, arguably you would use a wizard who can cast Wall of Stone. It's going to be a lot faster than using masons. Yes, you'll have your stonemasons and your carpenters to be around to support the walls and to brace them and do all of those kinds of wonderful things, but ultimately you would use Wall of Stone as your basic base. Now, the Wall of Stone spell gives the wall an armor class of 15 and 30 hit points per inch of thickness. That means a 15-foot thick wall has 5,400 hit points. It is one of the greatest structures on Earth. You're never, ever, ever, ever going to get through that thing. So even if you take it that you're going to build, and I've got my maths down here, and I have checked the maths. At least I got someone else to check the maths. Even if you build a wall that is only 5 foot thick of Wall of Stone, and then behind it for another 10 feet is half of Wall of Stone and wall of sort of rubble and stuff, you're still sitting on 3,600 hit points. So that's a massive amount of hit points according to the rules as written, according to the spell that you would ultimately use if you were building a castle. If you can afford to build a castle, you can afford to hire a mage. The benefits of doing this are incalculable. A mage will come in, and every single time they cast Wall of Stone, they're creating 10-foot segments. Yes, they stack them together, and there's you've got one wall that's 10 foot wide by 10 foot thick by 10 foot high. Tomorrow you do the same thing. You hire 4 mages, you're building a 40-foot section of wall, which, by the way, this tower here is a 20-foot by 20-foot tower. This wall down here is 40 foot in length. So in one day they could construct the single basic story of that that wall. The next day they build the wall to the second story, they build the towers, and so on and so on and so on. So wall of stone makes the most sense to my mind. If you're making a castle, that's what you're going to do. Now, yes, parts of the castle could be built out of wood and then covered over in a single layer of wall of stone. So you're even reducing that time frame, and of course you're reducing those hit points. But a single foot, a single inch, well, an inch is 30 hit points. 10 inches, which is less than a foot thick, 300 hit points. So that's a huge amount of hit points, and I don't think that that's necessarily what the designers had in their minds when they were making the spells. All right, so those are our terms and conditions as to how we're going to look at the spells that break castles. So now, when we look at the spells that break castles, I've broken them down into these 5 different categories. Basically, you've got a form of transportation, you've got a form of animation, damage, geography, and then alteration. Those are really the 5 different types of areas that the spells broke into, or fell into, or were broken into, if you like, that could theoretically destroy our castle. Now, the next thing that we need to bear in mind, and here I hope I can do it without cocking it up, is, can we go, oh, no, I want to go the other way. There we go. Now, I'm zooming out. This first red circle is 150-foot radius around the castle, 150 feet away. This next circle is 300 feet. So if you are standing, arguably, if you are standing, oh, wrong way. I'm just going to go all the way out there so you can see this great big circle. If you are standing on the edge of this red circle here, it is 300 feet to the castle. 300 feet. You can fit that castle into that space almost twice. Now, of course, the castle is not a perfect circle, so putting it in the center is a bit difficult. But it's 300 feet on average. That gives us pause for thought, doesn't it? What's the range of a longbow? 600 feet! Double that circle! So if you're a mage and you're trying to cast a spell at the castle, you've got to stand 600 feet away, otherwise some snappy little archer is going to fire his longbow from his tower 600 feet away to land and hit you. That gives you an idea of just how big the range is of a longbow. How far are the ranges of these spells? Well, let's go through them, shall we? Let's zoom in a little bit, because the furthest spell that I could find that doesn't just ignore distance altogether was 500 feet. So that's still a good distance, almost to the edge of the screen there, almost to where my finger is, would be about 500 feet that a spell could be cast to hit the outer wall of that castle. So let's just go in here a little bit. So we get back to the average range, which I found, which was about 150 feet, give or take. So that's this lighter circle behind the text here. Okay, so transportation spells automatically render all of those walls obsolete. If you look at things like Arcane Gate, it's a 6th level spell, so yes, you need a fairly high level magic user to cast it. Arcane Gate allows you at a range of 500 feet, so well at that very far range, the archer's got disadvantage at firing. You can erect a wooden wall with a little peephole through it so that your people are safe. You cast Arcane Gate, and for 10 minutes, you can have troops walking through that gate and appearing inside the castle almost wherever you want them to. Wherever you can see them, that's where you can put them. You can land them on the roof, you can land them in the main courtyard, you could land them on top of the gatekeep. So you really could pinpoint drop troops in with Arcane Gate. Of course, Gate, the level 9 spell, has no range because you can go anywhere with Gate. So Gate is a major problem. Dimension Door, 500 feet. It's only a 4th level spell. That's not too bad. You and one creature can go through. You can journey to wherever it is that the dimension door has opened up to. 500 feet, remember, that's still very, very far away from the castle. No one in the castle is going to see you doing anything, let alone be able to hit you, except for that one wily archer, of course, who will see you. Assuming the terrain is completely flat and you're not hiding behind, say, a small rock. So, dimension door, you and one other person of the same size can be teleported through this dimension door to anywhere within the castle. Whatever you are carrying to your carrying capacity goes with you. my carrying capacity, because I've hired a barbarian who has a magnificent strength, is carrying a gigantic barrel of explosives. I place the explosives at the base of the gate keep because that's where we want to deal our damage, or I even place it in the sewers below the castle or in the dungeon below the castle or wherever I want to place it. It ignites. It blows a gigantic hole inside the castle. I dimension gate back in again. It's only a 4th level spell, so anyone who's of, say, 7th level, 8th level, 9th level, that's not a problem for them to be able to do that, to be able to just bounce in, drop a bomb, fly out again, bounce in, drop a bomb, fly out again, bounce in, drop a bomb, fly out again. So, already our transportation spells have allowed us to circumnavigate the entire principle of having curtain walls. We don't need walls anymore. Why do you have walls? Walls are to prevent the minions from rushing forward. But if the warlord wants to invade a country, he's not going to invade it with thousands of troops. Thousands of troops have got all kinds of implications like feeding, housing, whoring. You've got so many things that you have to provide those troops in order to keep them happy, healthy, and ready to fight for you and die for you, that it just wouldn't make sense. I'm not going to spend 10,000 gold a month to keep my army alive. I'm going to hire 3 mages who are particularly good at transportation magic, and I'm just going to make sure that they have got giant explosives with them. They're going to go in there and obliterate everything. Or I'm going to have a few crack troops who I have spent years training up, who will infiltrate that castle and who will take out everybody in that castle. Why would that happen? Well, let's zoom in on that castle again. Now, the castle's taken some damage because I am very bad at what I was doing here. These walls, let me see if I can get rid of this. I'm going to have to go through the slideshow again because it resets every time. But I think this is an important point. These walls are 15 foot thick. Here you can see my mouse cursor right here. These walls are 15 foot thick with a 5 foot thick corridor in the middle of it so that the troops can move from tower to tower under the cover of this corridor. You dimension gate in, you teleport in, you use any one of these spells into that particular tower, you place a giant explosive in that tower, and then you teleport out. Ignoring the 5,400 hit points that wall has, the explosive goes off and potentially blows a hole in that wall. Even if it doesn't, if you teleport some crack troops into this tunnel, they will be able to take out pretty much anybody who comes running towards them because it's a 5 foot wide corridor. 5 foot wide corridor. So they can just basically form a defensive line on either side and just counterattack and just keep killing anyone who's in this particular castle trying to keep them alive. They could teleport on top of the tower and just take out all of the archers up there. The archers are armed with bows and leather armor, arguably. Maybe they've got chainmail if they're lucky. Your crack troops teleport in there, or your wizard teleports in there, drops a bomb, and leaves. So in other words, what has happened is that the teleportation spell, yep, I thought that would happen. The teleportation spell has rendered your guards completely obsolete, in my opinion. It really has said, you know what, you don't actually need guards, you don't need walls, you don't need guards. They're going to get taken out one way or another. Yes, they're a deterrent for common armies, but would you really have common armies? I don't know. Anyway, another form of transportation, of course, is flight. Now, flight opens up a whole different kettle of worms, a barrel, a can of worms, a kettle of fish. It's just all the idioms that we have. It really does. Flight causes a major problem. Now, the flight spell, level 3. Level 3, that means a level 5 mage can cast fly. They suddenly leap up into the air, or the barbarian who's holding the giant keg leaps up into the air. A level 5 mage, a level 6 mage can cast flight 3 times, maybe 4 times, depending on how they've been built. So now you have 4 barbarians who've got an impressive amount of damage reduction, flying over that castle, dropping highly explosive barrels down onto the castle itself. Well, that's a problem, isn't it? That's going to make sure that pretty much anyone who's on those towers is now inside, avoiding being blown to smithereens. That means your other wizards can walk forward and use all sorts of other spells, which we're going to get to shortly, to then obliterate the walls with the safety of knowing that no one is going to shoot at them, except for the archers firing through, of course, the arrow slits that have been built into the towers. Well, that's a whole different story, but nonetheless, we have made sure that we've locked down that castle. No one is going to come into the inner bailey. No one is going to go there whatsoever, because these giant bombs are falling down. And it's only going to last for 10 minutes. That's how long the flight spell lasts for. So for 10 minutes, there's this aerial bombardment happening. That's really, really dangerous. Now, of course, the flight spell, you are only flying at a relatively limited flight speed. I think it's 50 foot per round. So it's going to take you quite some time, if we really look at it, to fly all the way across these ranges where the archers could, in theory, attack you. And yes, absolutely, they could do that. So there's a better option, in my opinion, and that option is for you to fly a mage over, and then the mage to start using the animated spells. Now, the animated spells, animate object. Your range is 120 feet, so the mage can fly up as high as they can, still not 600 foot, so a longbow is still posing a problem to a mage who's flying at 120 feet. They can animate an object. Now, it's a 5th level spell, so already we know that the mage has to be able to fly in the first place, so that's okay. That will raise a large or a huge creature that's capable of doing 2d12 plus 4 damage. So that's a whopping, if they're lucky, 26 hit points of damage. Is that right? 24? No, 28. Sorry, 28 points of damage a round. They can do this for 10 rounds, providing that they're hitting the wall with an armor class of 15. The animated object has a +8 to hit, so it's fairly certain they're going to hit every single time. However, at 28 damage for 10 rounds, that's 280 damage. Against our 5,000 hit point wall, still has done sweet nothing to that wall. That wall is basically looking, going, I haven't even taken 10% of my hit points. However, animate object will be able to take out guards within, we'll be able to knock down doors and things, and do all of those kinds of wonderful bits and pieces. Big B's hand can be used to go and do pretty much the same idea, same amount of damage. So that's animating things. I'm not really too convinced that stone shape, which you could call as an alteration or an animation because it changes the shape of the rock, it doesn't really stop it from being a rock. Stone shape is a bit of a dodgy one because it says it's a 5 foot, no bigger than a 5 foot thing. So a wall, by being 5 foot thick, is technically beyond stone shape's sphere of influence, if you like. So animated objects can be dropped into place. Boom, thank you very much. Off you go, do your damage for the next 10,000 years, because that's how long it's going to take you to get through these castle walls. Direct damage. The mage is not willing to fly around or to send out minions or to do all this gate nonsense. They are just going to do damage, just vast quantities of damage. Well, disintegrate at level 6. It's only got a range of 60 feet, so you're going to have to get within this red zone to begin with. That's 60 feet. You fire off disintegrate. At best, it's 100 points of damage for one level 6 spell. 100 points of damage. Warp. 5,400 hit points. You need to cast that another 540 times? No, another 554 times. Whatever it is. Whether it's 54 or 540, it makes no difference. It is a significant amount of damage that you would need to deal to this wall. So we're getting to a point, which I think you've already got to already, or I've completely missed it somewhere. And somewhere in the DMG, which I didn't find, it says that walls only have 100 hit points, which would be ridiculous in its own right. So that's massive damage. I'm not looking at things like Fireball, where you can set things on fire and do all those kinds of things, because again, you've got that whole T's and C's about Warn and that sort of thing. Geography is one of my favorite ones, because then you've got this druid coming in. You've got a level 8 spell called Earthquake. Ha 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 ha! I shall use Earthquake to destroy the castle. No, you won't. You'll be throwing Earthquake. Earthquake deals 50 damage around, and it can last for a minute. So you're doing 500 points of damage. Thank you for playing. You've done a little bit more damage than the disintegrate spell, absolutely. And you've done it to multiple sections of the castle because it stretches over a distance. But that's about it. There's not a huge amount that you've actually accomplished. So, yeah, sorry for you. That's really not going to help you at this point in time. Kind of stuck, aren't you? So that then brings us to the Alteration Spells. Now, the Alteration Spells gives you something like Move Earth. Move Earth, again, it's a level 6 spell, so that's a very powerful spell. It's moving 20 cubic feet of earth, reshaping it. 120 feet range, so you can get into that sort of earth circle that we have. You can cast that and you can start to make trenches underneath the castle. Now, this was traditional medieval warfare. It actually predates medieval warfare, where a castle, the besiegers would simply tunnel underneath the castle and then collapse the tunnel, causing the wall to lose structural integrity and collapse in on itself. So this is a really old tactic, which it appears to be, as far as I can see anyway, the most significant way, the most valuable way, the most powerful way to actually render a traditional castle obsolete is to use this Move Earth spell. So it's a combination of geography and alteration. So you're changing the geography of things as you move forward. There are other spells. You can have Unseen Servant, which can dig, I suppose. So you can just cast a whole bunch of Unseen Servants to run around. That's a level 1 spell, so it's really, really simple. They could then start to actually physically dig. You can cast lots of little animated objects so they can dig as well. It all kind of falls into the same space, though, of attacking the geography rather than attacking the actual structure. Because, as we've already established, the structure itself has got so many hit points that it really, really doesn't matter what's going on whatsoever. So we say, all right, well, maybe magic then is not designed to attack castles. Maybe something that the designers wanted was to make sure that these magic wielding psychopaths didn't have the capacity to just obliterate any castle that ever existed. So we've got trebuchets and ballista, which were designed, well, maybe not ballista, but the trebuchet certainly, and catapults and things like that, were designed to destroy castles. That was their primary design. So let's move on to those wonderful weapons, those ranged weapons. The trebuchet, that fantastic structure which hurls gigantic boulders across territory and a phenomenal amount of damage. No, it's not. It's not really a phenomenal amount of damage. It's 80 points of damage. So yes, a trebuchet fired by level 1 peasants or level 0 peasants is doing as much damage as a magnificent wizard who can almost stop time and create wishes. That wizard can only do 100 points of damage by using Disintegrate. So a trebuchet does, in theory, a lot of damage. Of course, a barbarian at level 10 could probably catch a trebuchet boulder and not really quite care about the damage. So there's a scaling problem that we're coming across here, very, very, very obviously, insofar as some items have not necessarily scaled as much as other items. Either that or I've completely missed it and this whole video is a waste of time, which I hope it isn't. Now, I am getting to my point. It has taken me a long time, but I'm trying to be as thorough as I possibly can. Ballista do 3d10 damage, so that's 30 points of damage. If they hit, they're not likely to miss, but 30 points, 80 points. A trebuchet takes a long time to set up. You've got to have a forest nearby that you can cut the wood down so you can build the trebuchet and it can be burnt down. Anyway, so the trebuchet at the moment seems to be the most cost-effective way of attacking a castle from a long range. But at 80 points, if you have 100 trebuchets, that will knock down a wall eventually in one shot. Except that those boulders, by landing on the wall and then falling to the ground, will start to build their own wall, won't they? There's a significant risk there. Not that really trebuchets were designed to knock down walls and then for the people to pour in through. It was more about knocking down the walls until someone surrendered and said, okay, stop destroying my property. That kind of thing. So trebuchets and ballistas is not going to work. Mining, we've already spoken about. You can use spells for mining, or you can just use actual mining people for digging tunnels and things. And of course, fantasy, you've got dwarves and gnomes and all kinds of miney things that can get in there and really cause destruction. Flying, well, if you have an airship that sort of sails over the castle, again, dropping explosives and those kinds of things, you really run the risk. And when you look at the comparison, if you compare a castle where there was no flight during the medieval era with a structure that's been designed to be aware of aerial bombardment, the look of the structures is very, very different, isn't it? And the defenses of said structures are also very, very different. So that is where we finally end up. So even if we decide, okay, spells don't necessarily break castles, except for, in my opinion, that wonderful, wonderful, wonderful gating opportunity. That all gets negated with the spell Forbiddance. Spell Forbiddance is a 6th level spell. It has a spectacularly large range and it lasts for a day. So if one party can hire a mage capable of casting 6th level Disintegrates, the defending party could hire a mage who can cast Forbiddance all over the territory, all over the area, and suddenly no one can gate into the castle. What that means in my little brain is that every structure will just have Forbiddance cast all over it, everywhere. It would be like your insurance act, really. All right, you got walls, you got doors. Have you signed up for Forbiddance yet? It's only a gold piece every month, and we've got a bloke who comes round and he'll refresh it for you. He can move it if you think he needs to. So there's those kinds of things that you can add to your game where suddenly you can't gate in or out because it's forbidden by one little spell. Bottom line, as a storyteller, as a narrator, as someone who would rather have my characters engaged in plots and things, what do? We've got spells that have to change fundamentally the design of our castles. Flight, flying creatures, dragons, all those kinds of things. Those pose a significant threat because they can come in via air. Oh, we're going to put ballista on each of those towers. That's great, but you can't fire a ballista straight up. You can, but the ballista bolt's got to come straight back down again and you're going to become your own worst enemy. Archers firing arrows straight up, same problem. So there are some issues there that you're going to have to try and overcome. So the design of the traditional fantasy castle, I believe, has to completely change. And that's what we're going to look at in the next video, if it's something that you are interested in, is how do we design a castle that performs the functions that traditional castles performed within a little society of defense, administrative control, power, demonstration of wealth, all those kinds of things. How can we design a castle that will also be protected against all of these ridiculous pieces of magic, some of which are more terrifying than others? How do we do that? That will be in the next video if you want it to be. And the only way we can know is if you write down below. Hit that like button, hit the subscribe button. If you think that I missed something out, if you think that I made a mistake, if you think that no, Wall of Stone, this value is wrong, it doesn't work like that. Each layer would have 30 hit points. So once you hit the first 30 hit points, you then go to the next one. However you want to try and work it, I would be genuinely interested to see if I have made a mistake. If there are supplements out there that say that a standard 5-foot thick wall has 200 hit points, I could believe that. I could understand that and say, yes, 200 hit points makes sense. That means a trebuchet is going to take 4, 5, 6 hits to actually break that wall down. And that to me feels a little bit more realistic. 300 hit points, I could go with 300 hit points as well. 400 hit points, that's okay. So it's something to think about in your games. Narratively, if you want to have the PCs involved in breaking into a castle and to attacking a castle, these are the kinds of mechanics you're going to have, because you can't rely, in my opinion anyway, on the rules as written in this case. There just aren't enough of them for us to be able to make rational, in my thinking anyway, approaches to how does magic, how does trebuchets, how do traditional weapons work against breaking a castle. In this instance, I think one could say that there is no way that traditional assault magic or equipment would ever work against a castle. It just won't do it. So next week, possibly designing a castle to take these things into account, or looking at how does a fantasy world actually look if it's got magic in it inherently already. Those are the questions that I put to you. Anyway, I'm not sure how this would play out in anyone else's campaign. I know certainly in my campaign, trebuchets are going to be doing a lot more damage, because I don't care what level you are. If you get hit by a rock full on, you should be squished. There was one idea to cast Enlarge that was floating around my head just as a final thought. I promise it's a final thought. Cast Enlarge. The range of the Enlarge spell is 30 feet. So as the trebuchet fires the boulder, you cast Enlarge. That increases its weight 8 times. Would it arguably be doing 8 times as much damage? So it's now gone from 8d10 to 64d10. Well, as someone pointed out, physically, that's not how the whole physics works. Momentum, velocity, weight, all those kinds of things would come into play. The counter to that would be that you stand next to the castle wall as the trebuchet boulder is now in its descent. So now it's no longer using so much of its velocity. Now it's using gravity to pull it down. As it's coming down and within 30 foot of the caster then casts Enlarge. So then it is doing 640 potential points of damage as it slams into the wall. That is a tricky combination to pull off. It requires a whole bunch of timing and a wizard who's willing to stand 30 feet away from a wall that's about to explode under a tremendous amount of damage. But I suppose you could theorize that it is possible using the rules as written, provided that that wizard's initiative is higher than the trebuchet's. And the trebuchet travel distance, of course, travel time is... Anyway, the idea here is to recognize that if you are going to be running some kind of castle combat, that the traditional rules that are in existence won't help your players take the castle by force. They're going to have to infiltrate and go through the normal means. Is that a bad thing? Well, I do think so. I think sometimes it's nice for players to lead the attack on the castle and know that they can actually get through the walls and things and manage to take it. What are your thoughts? This is very different from our usual kind of content that we do. I want to know, is it something that works for you or not? And there's only one way to let us know. Leave your thoughts below. Anyway, Dungeon Fog was the map making provider here. I don't have a nice high resolution map because I had to make it fit onto this gigantic picture. But absolutely wonderful program. If you haven't checked it out, go and have a look. www.dungeonfog.com and see what you can see there. Now, if you do happen to like that, we've got a 10% discount code as part of our affiliation with Dungeon Fog. As a matter of fact, you'll see our logo on their website as we've partnered with them because we think this is such a wonderful tool that we want to be part of their experience. We want you to be a part of their experience as well because it's really, really easy to make really cool looking maps, in my humble opinion. Anyway, until next time, I wish you the very best of castle besieging, castle destroying, and the happiest of gaming.